A new book reveals some behind-the-scenes secrets from one of the most loved movies of all time. The 7 actors who played the Von Trapp children in The Sound of Music have put together a family scrapbook.
Oh, you think you know The Sound of Music? You think it's all sunshine, singing nuns, and wholesome family values wrapped in a bow? Take my friendly advice and buckle up, because hiding underneath those gorgeous Austrian Alps and those perfectly harmonized do-re-mis is a story absolutely dripping with drama. Feuding stars, near drownings, secret crushes, drunk actors, orange hair disasters, and one of Hollywood's most jaw-dropping lies about history. 60 years after it first hit theaters, this film is still keeping secrets. And today, we are spilling every single one of them. Welcome to The Sound of Music, 25 secrets hidden for decades. Number 1. The movie almost never happened. Let's start at the very beginning, a very dramatic beginning. By 1963, 20th Century Fox was absolutely hemorrhaging money. They had just bankrolled Cleopatra, starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, one of the most expensive productions in Hollywood history. The studio was on life support, so when the idea of making The Sound of Music landed on the table, many executives thought it was a gamble they simply couldn't afford. The film was budgeted at $8 million, a staggering sum for the time, and the studio was practically praying it would at least break even. Nobody, not the producers, not the stars, not even director Robert Wise, was dreaming that this little singing nun movie was going to save an entire studio. But that is exactly what happened. The Sound of Music became the highest-grossing film of 1965 and ultimately racked up a lifetime gross that, adjusted for inflation, makes it one of the top 3 highest-earning films in history. Fox went from near bankruptcy to counting mountains of cash, all because of a family musical. You can't make this up. But here's where it gets really interesting. Do you know who almost played Maria? Because it was definitely not who you think. Number 2. Different Maria contenders. Before Julie Andrews ever twirled on that mountain, the role of Maria was circulated to some of Hollywood's biggest names. Doris Day was seriously considered. So were Leslie Caron, Anne Bancroft, and, wait for it, Grace Kelly, the literal Princess of Monaco. Any one of those women could have walked through those convent doors and changed cinema history. The reason Julie Andrews got the part was almost accidental. Footage of her filming Mary Poppins became available to the producers, and suddenly, everyone could see something magnetic, something warm, something perfect for Maria. She became the top choice almost immediately. But here's the irony. Andrews herself was deeply hesitant. She worried that playing another beloved saintly nanny figure back-to-back would box her in, shackle her image permanently to some wholesome archetype. She almost turned it down. Can you even imagine this film without her? Number 3. Christopher Plummer turned down the role multiple times. And while we're talking about almost casting, let's talk about the role of Captain Georg von Trapp. Because the studio didn't exactly land Plummer on the first try, or the second. They tried Walter Matthau, floated names like Yul Brynner, who reportedly lobbied hard for the part, and Bing Crosby. Sean Connery's name was even thrown around. Yes, James Bond, in The Sound of Music. As for Plummer, director Robert Wise had seen him on Broadway and was set on him for the captain's role. But Plummer kept saying no. He turned the offer down several times. Wise eventually flew to London personally to pitch his vision, and only after Plummer was promised creative input into developing the captain's character did he finally relent. He accepted largely because he believed the role would help him prepare for a Broadway production of Cyrano de Bergerac. The Sound of Music was, to him, a stepping stone, a means to an end. That detail alone tells you everything about what was coming. So what happened once Plummer actually showed up on set? Well, things got very messy, very fast. Number 4. Christopher Plummer called it The Sound of Mucus. There is no diplomatic way to put this, so we won't try. Christopher Plummer hated this film, not mildly disliked it, not had mixed feelings. He loathed it. He was so openly disdainful that he coined a nickname for it that he used for decades. He called it the sound of mucus. He also referred to it as S&M because, in his words, it was so awful and sentimental and gooey. In a 2011 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Plummer said, "You had to work terribly hard to try and infuse some minuscule bit of humor into it." He told the Boston Globe in 2010 that he was simply a bit bored by the character of Captain Von Trapp. He skipped the film's 40th anniversary cast reunion. He skipped it. On the commentary track for the 35th anniversary DVD, he went even further. He admitted he was dead drunk during the music festival sequence. His words, not ours. In his 2008 memoir, In Spite of Myself, Plummer was characteristically blunt, writing that he was, at that time, a pampered, arrogant, young bastard spoiled by too many great theater roles. At least he could laugh at himself eventually. Number 5. Plummer called Julie Andrews Ms. Disney behind her back. It gets more delicious. While on set, Plummer was so irritated by Julie Andrews' relentlessly sunny, professional, warm disposition that he took to calling her Ms. Disney when talking to other cast and crew members. This was not a compliment. Andrews had a habit of entertaining the child actors between takes by singing songs from Mary Poppins, which had not yet been released. And to Plummer, a serious stage actor who considered himself Shakespeare-adjacent, this was apparently unbearable. He also compared working with Andrews to being hit over the head with a big Valentine's Day card every day. Let that land for a second. He later, in his more reflective years, admitted he had been immature about his feelings and acknowledged that Andrews was a consummate professional. But in the moment, he was not shy about his disdain. Ironically, and this is the part that should make everyone feel something, Julie Andrews has always spoken about Plummer with nothing but warmth and respect. She credited his barely disguised cynicism with keeping the film from tipping into pure saccharine territory. She said his attitude probably helped the movie. And she was right. They remained close friends until Plummer's death in 2021. But Plummer's behavior on set wasn't just limited to snarky nicknames. No. It went a lot further than that. Number 6. Plummer drank his way through Salzburg. Remember how Plummer hated the film? Well, he had a coping mechanism. Several, actually, all of them involving Salzburg's many taverns. According to The Irish Times profile from the film's 50th anniversary, Plummer spent much of the production drowning his sorrows in Austrian schnapps and local pastries. He developed such a fondness for both that he actually gained weight during filming, enough that his costumes had to be let out repeatedly to accommodate him. And then, as noted, he was openly drunk during at least one major filming sequence. It is, when you think about it, a remarkable piece of cinema history. The austere, commanding, military-precise Captain Von Trapp was being played by a man who was, at times, thoroughly hammered in the Alps. The fact that the performance is as good as it is might be the most impressive acting feat in the film. Number 7. Plummer had a secret crush on Andrews. Here is where the story takes a genuinely sweet turn, because for all of Plummer's bluster and snark, he was carrying a very different feeling toward his leading lady underneath all of it. At the Oprah reunion special years later, Plummer admitted openly that before they even began filming, he had been in love with Julie Andrews since seeing her perform in My Fair Lady on Broadway. He said, "I'd fallen in love with her in My Fair Lady, so I had a crush on her forever. And Andrews? She was, in her own words, in awe of him. She called him a gentleman." So here you have two people absolutely electric, with mutual admiration, working side by side for months, and one of them spent the whole time pretending to hate everything. What a production. Now, let's talk about what was happening on set with the children, because things were not exactly as wholesome as you might assume. Number 8. Liesl was 21, not 16, and had a crush on Plummer. Charmian Carr, who played the eldest Von Trapp daughter Liesl, she of the immortal 16 going on 17, was not, in fact, 16 going on 17. She was 21 years old when she auditioned, and she has been refreshingly candid about the fact that she had a major crush on Christopher Plummer. the man playing her fictional father. She described him as so perfect, praising his perfect British accent and his presence on set. And the casting of Liesl herself was nearly very different. Mia Farrow auditioned for the role. So did Sharon Tate and Terry Garr. Three women who would each go on to major careers in Hollywood, and all three lost the part to Charmian Carr, who had never been in a film before. The role of a lifetime, won by a complete newcomer. Number 9. Charmian Carr injured herself in the gazebo scene. Speaking of Charmian Carr and the gazebo, during the filming of 16 Going on 17, Carr performed an enthusiastic high kick and put her foot clean through one of the glass panels of the gazebo. She sprained her ankle in the process. Production continued regardless. And here is the gloriously chaotic detail. The ankle bandage is reportedly visible in some shots of the finished film, so the next time you watch that scene, keep your eyes on Liesl's ankle. Number 10. The Something Good scene was shot in the dark for a very undignified reason. The romantic climax of the film, the scene in which Captain Von Trapp and Maria finally declare their love for each other while singing Something Good, is famously almost entirely in shadow. Both actors are barely lit, shot in near darkness, their faces half visible. It looks intentional. It looks artistic. It looks romantic. It was none of those things. According to Plummer's memoir, the enormous arc lights suspended over the gazebo set were producing a sound that he described as prodigiously and continuously farting. The raspberry noise was completely unstoppable. Andrews described it similarly. During The Today Show in 2005, she said Plummer would be gazing into her eyes, declaring his love, and above them both came this relentless, flatulent buzzing from the lights. The two of them, and the entire crew, descended into uncontrollable laughter. By Plummer's estimate, there were 30 takes that were completely unusable. Cinematographer Ted McCord's solution was elegant and simple. Cast them in shadow, and no one would notice the cast was giggling. It worked beautifully. The romantic darkness of one of cinema's most beloved love scenes exists entirely because of a malfunctioning light fixture that sounded like a whoopee cushion. And the on-set chaos didn't stop there. Let's talk about a scene that put a child's life in genuine danger. Number 11. A child nearly drowned during the rowboat scene. The adorable scene in which Governess Maria and the Von Trapp children topple out of a rowboat into the lake is one of the film's most charming moments. Behind the camera, it was terrifying. Kim Carath, the 6-year-old actress who played the youngest child Gretel, could not swim. At all. Andrews recalled on The Graham Norton Show in 2019 that the assistant director waited until the absolute last minute before filming to mention this to her, saying casually, "The little one can't swim. So when you fall out of the boat, can you get to her quickly?" Andrews tried to fall forward to reach Carath, and fell backward instead. She had to swim frantically to get to the child. The poor little girl, according to Andrews, went under at least twice, came up, and then threw up on camera. Carath reportedly developed a lifelong fear of water as a result. Between takes, director Robert Wise poured buckets of water over the cast to keep them wet enough for continuity, which means Julie Andrews was soaked repeatedly in the service of a single scene that nearly ended in tragedy. Number 12. The famous opening scene nearly knocked Julie Andrews down every time. That opening shot, Julie Andrews twirling alone on an Austrian mountaintop, arms wide, singing into the sky, is one of the most iconic images in film history. Getting it was a nightmare. The scene was filmed on a mountain about 10 kilometers into Bavaria. The camera operator, Paul Beeson, hung on the outside of a helicopter, secured only by straps, to capture it without casting shadows on the subject. And the helicopter's powerful downward jet draft was so strong that Andrews could barely stay upright. She was knocked down repeatedly. After 10 takes of getting blasted off her feet, Andrews was, by her own account, getting genuinely angry. A crew member hid in the bushes with a megaphone and had to yell, "Go, Julie!" at precisely the right moment when the helicopter was in position. There were no toilets on the mountainside for miles. The temperatures were freezing, and the weather kept turning. That 10-second shot of carefree bliss took an extraordinary amount of miserable human effort to produce. Number 13. Julie Andrews' hair turned bright orange. Here is a behind-the-scenes catastrophe that has not gotten nearly enough attention. When filming began, Julie Andrews had her natural brunette hair, short, as she'd kept it after Mary Poppins. The film's producers decided the back of her head looked too dark on camera and sent her to get highlights. Something went catastrophically wrong at the salon. Andrews returned from her appointment not with subtle, warm highlights, but with, in her own words from her memoir, Homework, a bright orange mop. A genuine disaster. The solution was drastic. The orange sections were cut off, and the remaining hair was bleached completely blonde. The Maria von Trapp we all know and love, blonde, pixie-cut, radiant, is the result of a botched highlight job and an emergency bleaching session. It was, accidentally, perfection. And now for one of the most extraordinary facts about this film, one that rewrites everything you think you know about its most famous star. Number 14. Plummer's singing voice was dubbed. Here is something the studio never exactly broadcast at the time. When you hear Captain Von Trapp's baritone voice singing Edelweiss in a way that makes generations of viewers quietly weep, that is not Christopher Plummer. Plummer's singing voice was dubbed in October 1964 by Bill Lee, a veteran Disney playback singer. So the man who privately hated the film called it The Sound of Mucus and drank his way through the Alps didn't even get to contribute his voice to the songs everyone loves. The performance that helped define his career was partially someone else's. To his credit, Plummer never completely hid this. On the 2023 Super Deluxe edition of the soundtrack, some of his original vocal recordings, made before the decision to dub them, were included. Hearing his actual voice attempt Edelweiss provides an interesting alternate version of film history. Number 15. The Do-Re-Mi scene took 2 months to film. The cheerful 9-minute sequence in which Maria teaches the children their musical scales while dancing through some of Salzburg's most beautiful locations looks breezy, spontaneous, and effortless. It took nearly 2 full months to shoot, across 9 different locations all over Salzburg. Weather delays, logistical complications, and the challenge of coordinating 7 child actors through multiple sites made it one of the most grueling sequences in the production. 9 minutes, 2 months. Smile for the camera, children. Number 16. The real Maria was nothing like Julie Andrews' version. Now let's get into the history they were quietly rewriting. The real Maria von Trapp, the actual human woman who inspired this entire enterprise, was not the gentle, bumbling, sweetly clumsy figure that Julie Andrews portrayed. By all accounts, the real Maria was forceful, outspoken, and had a significant temper. She was deeply strong-willed, opinionated, and not exactly meek. She slid down banisters at the convent, climbed on the rooftop, ran through courtyards during periods of mandatory silence, and generally behaved in ways that made the nuns question her readiness for religious life. The film captured her spirit, but softened her considerably for mass consumption. The real Maria, interviewed on television in the early 1970s, came across as something of a force of nature, warm but formidable. Nothing like the pixie-haired, lovably awkward woman on screen. Number 17. The real Captain Von Trapp was warm and kind, not cold and distant. The film's entire dramatic engine in the first half is built on the idea that Captain Von Trapp is a cold military martinet who runs his household with a whistle and barely acknowledges his own children. Maria's mission is to thaw him out, to bring music and warmth into a home that has been drained of both. The real Georg von Trapp was, according to multiple accounts from his actual children and documented by the National Archives, a gentle, warm-hearted parent who had been making music with his family long before Maria arrived. He introduced music into the household himself. He played instruments with his children. His daughter, Maria Franziska, recalled in a 1999 Vanity Fair interview that they had at least 100 songs before governess Maria Kutschera ever set foot in the house. The film's central dramatic premise, that a singing nun thawed a cold father's heart is largely a fiction. The Von Trapp children were reportedly distressed by this portrayal of their beloved father. Now, speaking of historical inaccuracies, the film's most famous dramatic finale is also its most spectacular lie. Number 18. The mountain escape never happened. They took a train. This is the one, the big one, the climax of The Sound of Music. The Von Trapp family slipping away from the Nazis under cover of night, scaling the Austrian Alps on foot, crossing mountains into freedom, is one of the most stirring sequences in cinema history. And it is, from a factual standpoint, almost entirely invented. The real Von Trapp family did not escape over the Alps. They boarded a train in broad daylight. The real Maria Von Trapp confirmed this in a 2003 interview published in Opera News, saying, "We did tell people that we were going to America to sing, and we did not climb over mountains with all our heavy suitcases and instruments. We left by train, pretending nothing." They walked out through the rear gate of their villa, crossed the railroad tracks behind it, and boarded a train to Italy, not Switzerland. Georg von Trapp was an Italian citizen by birth, having been born in what is now Croatia when it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so the border crossing was entirely legal. And here is the geographic absurdity that the real Maria pointed out after seeing the film. If the family had actually hiked over the mountains surrounding Salzburg, they would not have ended up in Switzerland. They would have crossed directly into Nazi Germany. When Maria complained to director Robert Wise about this, his response, as recorded by author Tom Santopietro, was, "In Hollywood, you make your own geography." Maria is said to have famously groused, "Don't they know geography in Hollywood? Salzburg does not border on Switzerland." Number 19. The real family were already married for 11 years before they fled. The film compresses time dramatically, presenting the Von Trapp escape as happening almost immediately after Maria and the captain marry. It gives the impression that they returned from their honeymoon straight into Nazi occupation and had to flee within days of their wedding. In reality, Georg and Maria were married in 1927, a full 11 years before the Anschluss in 1938. They had children together, built a life, performed internationally as a professional singing group, and had been living as an established family for over a decade before they left Austria. The film collapses this entire decade for dramatic convenience, presenting their love story and their escape as virtually the same event. Number 20. Edelweiss is not an Austrian folk song. Perhaps the most widespread misconception spawned by The Sound of Music is the idea that Edelweiss, the gentle patriotic number sung by Captain Von Trapp with tears in his eyes, is a traditional Austrian folk song. It is not. It was written entirely by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II, specifically for the 1959 Broadway musical. Hammerstein, who was dying of cancer at the time, wrote the lyrics himself. It was, in fact, the very last lyric he ever wrote before his death in 1960. Because of the film's global reach, entire generations of people across the world came to believe that Edelweiss was a centuries-old Austrian anthem. Some Austrians reportedly bristled at the assumption. The irony is extraordinary. An American-composed song written for a Broadway musical became, in the public imagination, the quintessential sound of Austrian cultural heritage. And speaking of things that aren't quite what they seem, let's talk about Salzburg itself. Number 21. Salzburg did not want them there. When the production descended on Salzburg, Austria, in 1964, they were not exactly greeted with open arms. Nicholas Hammond, who played Friedrich, the eldest son, told Closer Weekly that the locals were openly hostile. "The town didn't want us there. They provided no cooperation whatsoever." The citizens resented the production for its portrayal of a dark chapter in Austrian history, the Nazi annexation and collaboration, that many Austrians would have preferred remain unexamined. It got specific and almost farcical. A local marionette theater refused to lend their puppets for the lonely goatherd puppet show scene. Their reason? "This is a classy operation we do here." A marionette theater. turning down one of the biggest Hollywood productions of the decade. In the end, the film's production team had to use puppets from elsewhere. When the movie was finally released in 1965, it was a smash hit everywhere in the world. Everywhere, that is, except Austria and West Germany, where it flopped. Austrians preferred the locally beloved 1956 German film Die Trapp-Familie, which had inspired the Broadway musical in the first place. The Sound of Music, beloved by the entire planet, was for years largely unwatched in the country where it was set. Number 22. The real Maria von Trapp actually appears in the film. Here is a delightful Easter egg hiding in plain sight. The real Maria von Trapp, the actual woman, the inspiration for the entire story, not Julie Andrews, appears in the film as an extra. During the I Have Confidence sequence, when Andrews as Maria is walking through a brick archway in the town, two women in Austrian peasant costume walk past in the background. The elder of those two women is the real Maria Augusta von Trapp herself, accompanied by her daughter Rosemary. Director Robert Wise had consulted with Maria throughout the production, and she was occasionally on set. Her appearance was brief and went uncredited, but she is there, walking through the same frame as the woman playing a version of her own life. Number 23. A child actor grew 6 inches during filming and created a continuity nightmare. Nicholas Hammond, who played Friedrich, the eldest von Trapp boy, experienced an entirely inconvenient growth spurt during the months of production. He grew approximately 10 centimeters, roughly 4 inches, while filming was underway, creating a genuine nightmare for the continuity department. Costumes had to be continually adjusted. Scenes had to be carefully edited to account for the height inconsistency, and the poor boy essentially became a different physical person between the first day of shooting and the last. On the other side of the spectrum, young Kim Carruth, Gretel, was so unaccustomed to Austrian cuisine that she subsisted largely on fried artichokes and bread throughout the shoot, and subsequently gained enough weight that Christopher Plummer could no longer carry her across the Alps, as had originally been planned for certain shots. Number 24. Julie Andrews sang Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious to the children, and they had no idea what it was. During the long, often exhausting hours between filming, Julie Andrews used to entertain the 7 child actors by singing them songs. One of her favorites was Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious from Mary Poppins. Here is the exquisite detail. Mary Poppins had not yet been released. The children had never heard the song before, so they just assumed Julie Andrews had made it up on the spot as a fun nonsense song to amuse them. They had no idea it was from one of the biggest films of the year, that it would become a global phenomenon, or that the woman singing it to them in between takes in Salzburg was about to become one of the most celebrated movie stars in the world. They just thought it was a funny song that Maria sang. And finally, a secret that reveals just how messy the line between reality and Hollywood truly is. Number 25. The real family never actually sang Do Re Mi, and the real captain used a whistle. Here is the final, layered irony at the heart of everything. The musical education that forms the centerpiece of the film, Maria teaching the Von Trapp children their scales through Do Re Mi, never actually happened. The real Von Trapp children were already accomplished singers before Maria arrived. She didn't teach them music from scratch. She taught them madrigals, which they reportedly took to with ease because their musical foundation was already deep and solid. And yet, the film does get one detail technically right while getting the context completely wrong. The real Captain Von Trapp did use a whistle to call his children. Each child had a distinctive call signal. But contrary to the film's depiction, this was not some cold military drill imposed on a household stripped of warmth. The children, by their own accounts, did not find it strange or harsh. It was simply their father's way of calling them. In a large house and estate, it was practical. The film uses this same whistle as a symbol of emotional repression and rigidity, something Maria must overcome. The real children, hearing this, must have experienced quite a whiplash. So, there you have it. 25 secrets, 60 years in the making. The Sound of Music was held together by an actress who nearly walked, a leading man who hated the project, a director playing fast and loose with geography, and a true story that even Maria von Trapp side-eyed. And yet, it's still a cinematic miracle. The off-screen drama rivaled anything on-screen. If you enjoyed that, hit subscribe, because we have a lot more classic films with secrets that have been buried way too long. Drop in the comments. Which of these 25 secrets surprised you most? My money is on the geography.